once again to Programming 102, and in today's video we are going to be looking at HTML attributes. So we did not use any attributes before in any of our classes, so the natural thing would be to ask, what is an HTML attribute? An HTML element isn't exactly a physical entity, but it is modeled after a physical entity, so it actually has properties and characteristics and things to identify it. It may be composed of other elements, and there's some representational state attached to it. We have seen from previous lessons that there are behaviors associated with certain HTML elements, behaviors or functionality as well. So an HTML element conforms to this model where there is some sort of state and behavior associated with it. Let's assume this diagram represents a generic HTML element. So a generic HTML element would have some sort of internal state and some defined behavior. And when we get to JavaScript programming, you will become a little more familiar with what we are speaking about here. It will become a little more evident. So just take it for now and let's go with the flow. So our generic HTML element, we are going to agree that it has some internal state, some behavior, and part of its state and behavior would be something called attributes. And these attributes can be configured or manipulated to configure the state or behavior of an HTML element. Now that we know a little more about attributes generally speaking, and we can visualize now that attributes are part of some existing entity, we could define now HTML attributes in a manner that would more or less be easier for the student to associate some sort of meaning with HTML attributes. So looking at our diagram here, we have that attributes can be configured or manipulated to configure the state or behavior of an HTML element, and this leads directly into our simple definition. What are HTML attributes? And HTML attributes are properties or some defined state of an HTML element that can be configured to add meaning or functionality to the element. So you don't need to memorize this, and understanding of it is sufficient. Basically, it says that an HTML attribute is some part of an HTML element's internal state or part of its internal composition that we can configure, and by configuring it we can give the HTML element some different sort of meaning or some different sort of behavior. So let's look at some code now, and this is the code for the actual web page we were just looking at here, and we have a hyperlink, right? So the anchor tag A, and this href is our first experience with an HTML attribute for this course so far. So this anchor tag, which is A, has two attributes within it, href and title. And we see that the href takes a value, which is usually what you'd call a URL, right? our purposes in this lesson, we'll just say it's this file name, lesson3.html, and title takes a value, HTML tags, and what that does is it creates a sort of tooltip, right? So we see it here, HTML tags as a tooltip. Now let's test our anchor tag that we were just looking at and take a look at one of the attributes of our anchor tag. So if we were to use our model that we created, so this is the anchor HTML element, and within it, it would contain an HTML attribute with a name called href, and this href attribute has a value which is usually some sort of URL, right? That would have been the file name. This file name here would be the value, and it has a behavior that is associated with configuring this href attribute, which is when a value such as a URL is supplied, it allows the user of the document to click on the anchor and go to the document at the supplied address. So this here is the configuring or manipulation of the attribute to give some sort of behavior. So we altered the state of the anchor tag by supplying a URL, and that would have a certain behavior associated with it, which is, let's take a look here, to supply an address that allows us to click on this anchor and go to the previous lesson. The general format of most HTML attributes would take this format: attribute name equals and some value, attribute name equal and some value. And let's go to the W3 Schools HTML attribute reference, and this page, this is it here, HTML attribute reference, contains all the HTML attributes that we can use with different HTML elements, and the majority of them use that same format. So we see here image, source is an attribute, equal and a value is supplied, width is an attribute with equal and a value is supplied, height is an attribute and it takes a value as well. So the general format of HTML attributes are, they operate as name value pairs, attribute name value, attribute name value, attribute name value. Now there are exceptions to this, what we call Boolean HTML attributes, where there is no need to explicitly state a value, and it is actually incorrect to place the word true or false as the actual value. The next thing we need to learn about HTML attributes is that the attribute value is usually quoted either using double quotes, or we can also use single quotes as well. So in this case we have href value lesson3.html being double quoted, attribute title with value HTML tags single quoted. So we can either use double quotes or single quotes. Please use one or the other, don't mix them. HTML attribute names are not case sensitive. but convention wise they are always written in lowercase. So it's valid to write them in uppercase or mixed case, but for readability and consistency, it's better to stick to lowercase. And thank you for coming, and see you in the next video. Keep good, be blessed.